We started Horizon Africa about 7 years ago now. Its thought process began in 2009, but we opened our doors in January of 2010. And when we started the business, really the idea was to bridge the gap between, on the advisory side, between skill and scale. So the scale, by scale I mean that the large four advisory firms or firms with advisory capacity, mainly comprising of the big four, were not reaching the private side of business, or if they were, it was literally on a very little or a small level. Having worked in the private side of corporate finance for majority of our lives, we had a fairly good network on that end. If you recall, in 2010, around that time, we were also voted as probably the most optimistic people in the world, I think, as Kenyans. Yes. And so matching that with capital inflows was something that we felt offered us an opportunity to do so. So we started with a small team of 4, largely doing advisory deals for clients that we knew in the past. And that team now has grown not only in Kenya, but to a team that oscillates between 8 and 12 people operating in the 3 East African countries. We are largely comprised of 3 units here. The mergers and acquisition side of our business. And there largely we are representing sellers of businesses, either attracting equity into their businesses or selling outright. And then we also do a lot of work with respect to raising of capital. So, and from the private side, again, from private sources. So we are talking about debt, mezzanine to actual equity. And again, we are intermediating between the opportunities and the capital flows. And then the last piece of our business, which has been extremely fast growing, is standalone advisory. So I don't necessarily have to own the opportunity in order to play in it. So we offer due diligence services. We actually help people build the thinking as they are going to market from a financial standpoint, which means that we are building financial models. We're advising on commercial commercial viability and things of that nature. And that's now the third side of our business. Right. I think, firstly, probably let me address insurance. We see a tremendous amount of interest, foreign interest, from external and large, either fund-based or strategic interested investors for insurance assets. But when I look around at the insurance companies right now, the first tier of insurance companies largely already has participation from either, or they're either run by a strategic or have had private equity in their composition. It will only serve to create a bigger market for the exchange of capital in those companies. Now, for as long as the risk-based capitalization rules apply and the need for increased capital because of how reserves are from a capital perspective are calculated, then I see a correlation with larger players coming into the market. And so their issue now is they come in very interested and realize, hang on a minute, Kenya already has almost all the large African insurance investors in one way or another. And so they're now looking at that next level of companies, which I still believe there are probably a few still in private hands. But as these regulations change, then they have to look outside of themselves in order to grow and compete. And I think the level of sophistication is one of the reasons why these guys are actually are interested in bringing in that expertise. So I see it as a good thing for M&A activity. Yeah, and I see any M&A practitioners or any strategics coming in as finding opportunity and also reaping benefits from us. I mean, the statistics that I'm aware of is that we're still relatively under. Correct. In terms of banking, I think it's going to speed up things. I think when you speak to what I would call external experts, or people involved in capital markets outside of Kenya, they don't necessarily think we've done the right thing by capping interest rates. The jury's out. I don't know the answer to that question, but certainly it will simply make it much more difficult for the smaller players to access deposits, making it more difficult for them to lend and lend competitively. So that then means that they now need to look sideways amongst themselves, or to intensify that interest that was already there. I hazard a guess, but I think all the private banks in this market must have been spoken to by an interested party at some point, and they held out for whatever reason. So now it's no longer just a license issue, and it's no longer just a capital for growth. It's can I do my basic function of attracting cheap deposits and lending money out? And my answer is it just became harder.
Yeah, the margins obviously
exactly
have been thoroughly squeezed.
Right, correct. So we've already seen in one instance where, in a transaction we are working on, that there is a strategic looking at a bank that we are bank transaction that we are doing. Hitherto there was no real pressure. There was no real pressure. But I imagine that has now changed, and the thinking around that has now changed. So from a banking perspective, I think you'll start to see a few deals. Yeah. Firstly, we operate in the region precisely because in each of these East African countries there is a slowdown in elections. Luckily, they're not held at the same time.
Yes, luckily.
So in October of last year, Tanzania was at the polls. There was a slowdown. At the beginning of this year, until the petition Uganda, there was a slowdown. We are heavily going to do some marketing effort in Uganda towards the close of this year, and have projects in most of these East African countries. I think where are they in terms of the interest is there because the growth characteristics are the same. Right? That fast-growing population in Uganda is similarly the same that we have here. Their companies may require slightly more work in terms of readiness to do a transaction. Their understanding of a need for an advisor may be a little bit much heavier, but certainly we've got pipeline in those countries, which then means that there's a market. It's highly competitive in Kenya. Some of the investors that I know have gone and done deals in Uganda and Tanzania faster than they have in Kenya, just mainly because it's much more competitive here. The price of entry here is probably slightly higher than the price of entry in those markets. But over time, I think those issues will level out. Interesting question. I tell my partner, hopefully I'll have passed this farm on to somebody else. We definitely, as the core of our business, will have grown. We want to be the advisor of choice, right? And in certain aspects, in certain segments of the market we are. So we see ourselves growing and playing a much bigger role in terms of what's actually happening in our economy here, size and scale. We're a regional business as it is. We necessarily don't see the need for physical offices. We have a young team, not afraid to get on aircrafts and go and close transactions in the region. But I see us diversifying quite a bit into by segment, right? Going to the real SME sort of segment, providing business advisory services, providing financial services, maybe even as basic services as accounting, bookkeeping, audit services, etc. So we see that as an interesting growth prospect. Maybe not as Horizon Africa, but as an associated business. We want to remain independent, though, because I think by remaining independent, then you truly give independent advice. So we don't want to be, at least for the immediate future, want to be part of a large bank or any other large institution, because I think there's a you can say you're independent, but the person who you're saying it to has to feel like you really are. I mean, our challenge is obviously that advisory is very personalized.
Yes, yes.
So it's very people-driven. So we are also trying to develop our own people here, and also to get trusted as well. So you turn a very technical person into a relationship person, and help them grow their network, and hence open up more business for yourself is where we are. But we hope to be around, touch wood, bigger and better.